Good morning. Good morning, and on behalf of my fellow trustees of the ASCC, welcome to our very last conference as the national representative body for Scotland's community councils. We very slightly changed the order in the sense that rather than Leslie introducing me, I introduced Leslie. But I've been asked to speak just briefly first on why we're all here today, or at least why the ASCC thought it was a good idea to have this event today. After, what is it now, 9 years with the ASCC, my last, I suppose, official duty today is a bit of a bittersweet moment for me. And it comes in the same year that I'm planning to retire as a community councillor after 12 years as a community councillor in my area. A job which for me was a bit of a sort of a family inheritance, because my father was a community councillor in my community council before me, and that was what first got me involved, largely whether I wanted to or not. In the course of closing up, there's a legitimate question to be said, well, what's the point of a conference if what you're doing is shutting down? Well, the main point of the conference is to try and do something useful just before we shut down. So to the extent that the Board of Trustees of the ASCC hope anything will come from today, we're hoping that what will come is, as a group of people, as a microcosm of our sector and our thousands of community councillors, we might do a little bit of reflection on where community councils are today and where they might find themselves in 5, 10 and 15 years' time. Because if there is a future for community councils, a substantial part of that is going to be in the hands of community councillors. And there are a number of threats to our sector out there. You've heard me, many of you will have heard me say before, and I've also been quoting a variety of national publications as saying that if we just go on as we are just now, in about 10 years' time, probably more than half the community councils in Scotland will have simply died out in the most literal sense of that word. And that the number of people left because of people who have retired for ill health or who have simply passed away will be such that there won't be enough people left to keep a lot of our organisations going. In my community council, I'm 40 years old, and yes, I look a lot older, that's this job. In my community council, I'm 40. We have one member who's in his late 50s. Everyone else is a pensioner. And most of those pensioners are more than 70 years old. Well, the best will in the world, one way or the other, in the next 5 years, or 10 to be completely optimistic, all of those pensioners will not be on my community council. And I've been on my community council for 12 years, and I was the youngest person on it when I started. I'm still the youngest person on it, and that shows no signs of changing. So what are we going to do if there's going to be even a medium-term future for community councils, but our age gets older and older and older? That's the nature of our demography. We're also hoping that the conference will leave even the tiniest seed of a legacy for the ASCC. It was set up back in 1994. The spearhead for it came from a group of community councillors in Perth and Kinross, and as a reaction to the plans to change local government boundaries and create unitary authorities back in the mid-90s. And community councillors back then were concerned, well, if we don't have district councils anymore, that we have the closest relationship with, but we have unitary authorities that are potentially much wider and much bigger in their geographical scope, how close will our individual relation as a community council be with that local authority? And so the idea for the ASCC was born. And our hope today is, and if it is anything, it will be a seed, because in these circumstances and with these numbers it couldn't be more than that, that there'll be something that goes on that begins to have us starting to think about things as a sector. And part of that legacy, we hope, and it's something that we have been banging on about certainly since I was first involved in the ASCC in 2003, is for us to think about our practice as community councils and community councillors. And those of you who've heard me speak before will know I love to give real-life examples of this, so I will give you simply because it happened very recently. I got a phone call from a journalist in one of the Edinburgh main newspapers yesterday, looking for a quote, and the story he told me was, the local authority, Edinburgh City Council, is planning to postpone the community council elections that would normally happen in August of this year and have them sometime in 2013. And quite a few of the community councils in Edinburgh are absolutely up in arms at this. And I said, well, I don't know what the story is. It'll depend on what's in their local document. I'll go away and look and I'll come back and talk to you. Went away and looked, and it says in the Edinburgh scheme there won't be community council elections in the same year as there are local government elections. So Edinburgh City Council was well within its own powers to move the date of elections in Edinburgh. Went back on to the journalist and told him that, and his response was, well, I've just lost a good story, because he was trying to write a story that was community councils and Edinburgh City Council at loggerheads. And he lost that story. But then he thought, I wonder if I could write a story along the lines of, do community councils pay any attention? Because how can none of them have noticed that this is in this scheme? And I kind of talked him down off the ledge of that one, because that's the kind of publicity we don't need. But just to think, without pointing any fingers, think about this for a second. The City of Edinburgh reviewed its CC scheme in the last couple of years. Every community councillor in Edinburgh was involved in that consultation, and in it very clearly says we don't have community council elections in local authority election years. And yet there are, who knows how many community councils in Edinburgh up in arms because the council has said there won't be elections this autumn. So, did they not read the scheme? It's the governing document for community councils in Edinburgh. Surely it's something to read. And lastly, in terms of where we fit as a sector into the future, there's a massive public sector reform agenda out there with national government and with local government. And no one knows yet where that's going to go and how it's going to work. And what absolutely no one knows is how community councils will fit into it if they do. But there's a variety of suggestions being made. Do community councils start to take on more responsibilities? Do they start to actually deliver services as opposed to being just a voice for their communities? And if that's going to happen, how is that going to happen? But the key thing for us as a Board of Trustees is there are a variety of issues. Some of them are threats, some of them are just challenges that we have to look at as a sector. And the worst thing that we could possibly do is not think about them until it's too late and then they're right in front of us and we don't know how to react. And so there's a hope that at least some of that will come up today, and it might start a thinking process so that if there is a future for community councils, and make no mistake, that's the question being asked in various of the halls of power, not what it will be, but if there will be. And there are various parts of the establishment in Scotland have different agendas about that, but if there is a future for community councils, what's it going to look like? And that's, we hope, what you'll get from today. And we've asked, and she very kindly agreed, Leslie Riddoch, someone who needs no introduction, to take us through that day. Largely because I've served more than enough of my shifts of being the person with the bullseye in my forehead, but also because we think this is an event that the things that we're going to talk through, it's worthwhile having someone that can really take us through all the things that we want to talk about. So again, on behalf of my colleagues, a welcome, and it's a pleasure now to hand over to Leslie. Leslie, thank you.
Thanks very much indeed. I'm trying to figure out where the sugary microphone bit's coming from. Were you hearing a kind of woof, woof, woof? Am I the only one that's cursed with this ultra hearing as a result of 10 years of having headphones on my head? Good. Okay. Well, I'm really pleased to be here today. Some of you may know I've been quite involved in many sort of community level activities in my time. Strangely enough, though, not at a community council level, and I have just been wondering why that is. There's two things for me that are really important about this. On the one hand, I'm currently doing a PhD. I'm a student, and part of it is in Norway. I've learnt Norwegian-ish. I spend some of my time across there, and that has made me very aware of the very different way things operate in the Nordic countries. In fact, it's not really that way round anymore. It's made me very aware of the very strange way we work in Scotland, because we are the odd ones out. In Britain generally is the odd one out when it comes to not having a municipal level of government. We are practically the only ones in Northern Europe. Never mind Northern Europe. The people who have the smallest levels of government are the French. The cantons they have there are teeny. The Germans, ditto. If you looked at a state like Baden-Württemberg, which has twice the number of people that Scotland has, it has something like 10 times the number of elected councillors at all sorts of levels, from tiddly-widdly right up to the Baden-Württemberg land government. Now, to mention that in this country is usually to provoke a fit of coughing. I'm delighted nobody here has started doing that yet. Well, you wouldn't really, because you are part of the converted, are you not? But normally the notion that there should be more representatives, more elected people, is met by a fit of, well, that's too many. They're all duplicating one another. Why do we have so many levels of things? And I mean, at the way that we are at the moment, that's a perfectly reasonable question. Because with disempowered local government, you don't get as much as you should do for your efforts. I don't know why this country is this way anymore, but it is. And I think we suffer from not having truly municipal, powerful little bunches of folk who know everybody else and know how to get on with it. We don't. So here we are. That's one part of my experience, and it's a very strong one nowadays. It seems to me to be the foundation stone upon which the Nordic success stories, plural, have been built. They trust the heck out of one another. And upon that, you can build quite a lot. If you didn't trust the heck out of one another, right down at the smallest level, you can't build very much. You end up falling back on formality. You end up with a lot of structures. You end up with a lot of overarching umbrella groups. You end up with a heck of a lot of liaison in your life. You end up with quangos that can suck the air out of a room. And I'm not saying that to be malign about quangos. It's that nature abhors a vacuum, and there is one, and it's around your level of government. And whilst you are not properly empowered, the power in the room will go somewhere else, and it has. So you can look over the last 10 to 20 years and you can see function being taken from your level of government, from also local government, and you can see state and quango government have generally increased in powers. Personally speaking, that's not a country I'd like to live in, but it's a hard boat to turn. And do you know what you're going to do today? You're going to start to turn it, aren't you? I'm sorry, I know it's not pantomime, Susan, but aren't you? Right. Okay, it's always nice to know the hecklers are at the front where they should be, you know. So, just while we're at it, can I just check out, now, where's Vincent? He's saying he's 12 years a community councillor, or is it 20? 12 but felt like 20, perhaps? 12. Right. How many folk are 12 years, 10 to 20 years a community councillor? 10 to 20 years. Right. How many folk are more than 20 years? The heckler. Right. Okay. And how many people are more than 30? By gum. Okay. Who is the longest serving here? Do you know? It's down to a bidding war. Right, madam, how long have you been serving? 35. Have we got a bidding? Any advance on 35? Right. This is our winner. Madam, what's your name? Jean Charlesley. From where? Right, and where's about? Glasgow. Right, can we have a round of applause for Jean? I'm always interested to know, as a daughter of a woman from Wick and a man from a kind of road junction in the middle of Banffshire, which you would, now I can tell you, nobody will know this one, Ordequill, right? I'm always interested to know how the far-flung are represented in a room. Have we got folk from the islands? Anybody? Where are you from? Skye, right, sunny Skye. Right, have we got folk from Orkney, Shetland? How could I have thought Orkney had the most powerful community councils for miles around? Right, have we got folk from the borders? Right, okay. Glasgow? Edinburgh? Right, where are you all from? What's the big group I've not mentioned? I mean, lots, obviously. I know at Wick. Right, okay, Highland. Ayrshire. Okay, Argyll and Bute. This is interesting because you're truly sprinkled around. There's not a big posse from anywhere. Dundee? Fife. Okay, the Lothians, although I know they all like to be separate, but the Lothians?
Dumfries and Galloway.
Dumfries and Galloway. You mentioned it and you're not from it, sir. That's kind of you.
I'm from it.
You are from it. Do you like to put your hand up when you mention it then? Right. Well, no, don't start. Right? OK, we're doing Dumfries and Galloway. How many people? Well, that is interesting, isn't it? So, OK, we've got a fairly spread audience. That's good. So, right, well, today we've got 3 speakers who are going to really set the scene very, very well. And actually, I'm really impressed that at a meeting which comes at the end of something significant, that people who are connected to your future, who might well be seen as kind of, putting the villains of the piece is putting it far too strongly, you're responsible for what happens next, and in a way responsible for the decision not to fund this organisation. So it's good that you've come, because this needs to end properly. It needs to end with people understanding what has happened, what is the future, as far as it's possible to know, and to leave this room with some degree of clarity, if that can ever be had in life. I must say, I think clarity is an overrated thing, because since it doesn't naturally exist in great quantities, you're usually not getting complete clarity when you get an answer. But still, we'll look for something that people can go out with and know why they're being a community councillor from here on in. Is that a good aim? Are you still alive? It's worth checking. OK, so let's hear from our first speaker. It's Alistair McKinlay, who's team leader of the Local Government and Communities Directorate. I did ask Alistair to say something interesting about himself, apart from being a civil servant. And he had to think for a bit and then said he likes 1930s films and his favourite film is Casablanca. I'm not quite sure how that kind of colours you in as a human being. I'm not sure if you're the Humphrey Bogart type or whatever. We'll find out. He's been the team leader in this unit for quite some time. He led the development of the Community Empowerment Action Plan in 2009. He was involved in drawing up the regeneration discussion document that's looking to the future, and he's responsible at the moment for the Community Empowerment and Renewal Bill and the Community Council Short Life Working Group. So, would you please welcome to the stage for his talk, Alistair McKinlay.
Well, good morning, everyone. Not quite as enthusiastic as Leslie got, but I'm a civil servant, so... Right, OK. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. But that just sounds like the government telling you to do something rather than encouraging you. Absolutely delighted to be here. Very grateful to the ASCC for the invite. And I think what Leslie said about this being the end of something, but really just the beginning of something else, is a critically important thing for the day. Unfortunately, I've got to go at lunchtime. I've got another meeting I couldn't get out of back in Edinburgh, but my colleague Anna Gilbert, if Anna would put her hand up, who many of you may know, who works with me in my team, she'll be staying for the whole day, so we'll be able to hear the full debate. I don't think you'll end up with huge amounts of clarity about the end point of what community councils will, could or should be by the end of my talk, but that's because of where we are and what I think is a really important process. I just took on policy responsibility for community councils at the end of January, and I'm delighted about that. And I hope you'll forgive me if I say that some of my colleagues, when I say that, their eyebrows go up and they look a bit odd. But I'm genuinely seeing this as a real opportunity, because although this is the first time I've had policy responsibility advising the Minister, Derek Mackay, who's got ministerial responsibility for community councils, I've had a lot of dealings with community councillors and community councils over the years in work I've done in broader discussions about community engagement and empowerment. So really, I'm not going to speak for very long. I'm just going to say some pretty high-level stuff about some things that are going on within government that I hope you'll find useful before our next 2 speakers, and then happy to take questions. Oops, wrong button. That's just a very quick slide to remind us that we don't have a completely blank sheet of paper. An awful lot of good work has gone on between CoSLA, the ASCC and government to put those things in place. Now, my understanding from speaking to community council is a lot of that stuff has been very helpful, but I do get a sense that people think there's more could and should be done. And a critical thing I hear time and again about community councils, I'm really grateful to Leslie for kind of getting you to say where you were from, because the picture across the country, and even within some parts of local authorities, seems to be very different in terms of people's experiences of things like model schemes or what kind of support councils provide. provide to community councillors. So that's a good starting point, and I think it gives us a springboard to go on. That's why we're still talking about this, and I know Vincent suggested there might be an if about some thinking in terms of community councils. That's not certainly where I'm starting from. And just a quick reminder, the reason I'm here is that I work for Scottish ministers, and the Scottish Government are committed, as the SNP's manifesto commitment said, to continue to look at how to make community councils more relevant. So that's what I can talk about. As a citizen, I would love to get into some of the debates about the things that Leslie set out in her opening speech, but that ranges way beyond what the government has currently said it would be looking at this point. A quick bit of context that Vincent referred to, public service reform, the late Campbell Christie's report that I think was met with a lot of positive feeling across a range of sectors, and I've just picked up that one quote. I mean, that to me absolutely implies a role for community councils, a growing understanding in the public. Certainly, thanks very much for that. Public services are built around people and communities, their needs, aspirations, capacities and skills, and work to build up their autonomy and resilience. A growing understanding in the public sector, I think, that unless you do that, you do not end up with public services that are long-term sustainable. That the kind of capacity and potential that's in this room and amongst your colleagues spread right across Scotland, if that's not properly harnessed, we're not going to achieve the outcomes that this government wants to see achieved in Scotland. And the Scottish Government response was very positive to the Christie Commission recommendation. I'll read them all out, because actually that writing might be a little small. 4 pillars supporting the Government's response. First, a decisive shift towards prevention, activity that stops problems happening longer term. Greater integration of public services at a local level, driven by better partnership, collaboration and effective local delivery. All a bit jargony, but really reflecting that it can't be about individual services suiting themselves. There has to be working together. And for me, that's where it's fundamentally important that that first Christie point is picked up, that local people have to be involved in how that works. Greater investment in the people who deliver services through enhanced workforce development and effective leadership. And I'd suggest that actually workforce development and how the public service works with local people, that's an interesting aspect of workforce development. And finally, a sharp focus on improving performance through greater transparency, innovation and use of digital technology. And again, I think you could argue that the role of community councils, other community organisations around that issue of transparency might be a very interesting one going forward. Last bit of context, Leslie mentioned that I'm leading on the Community Empowerment and Renewal Bill. That's a whole presentation in and of itself. But one of the things the bill's looking at is that business of how would you legislate to ensure that there's stronger participation of local people in the planning and delivery of services. And in discussions we've been having with people up to this point, the potential for this bill to perhaps address issues to do with community councils that might be thought to be to do with the current legislation is very much a live prospect. So some issues that you might think you would like to see in law that would help you do your jobs better, this is a real opportunity. So we'll ensure that community councils see the consultation document, which is just going through its final clearance processes at cabinet level now, and we'll be writing to the Minister later today to get his views on certain aspects of the consultation. So it's likely to be mid-late May that this consultation document will come out. Coming on to the Community Council specific stuff that's happening just now in government. The fantastically named Short Life Working Group was set up at the end of December. Colleagues went to people who they knew had a deep amount of experience from a range of places across the country, including Orkney, because of their lauded, in some ways, status as community councils who seem to have quite a high degree of power. Not meant to be representative, very, very small, really just to start discussions about key issues. A report will be produced in the summer, and assuming that the presentations will be available, I've put up that web link there where you can get more information about the membership, the remit, minutes from the meetings and so on. That is the remit, to look at ways to build resilience and capacity of community councils in order to strengthen their role and relevance as voices for their communities. And the group is looking at 5 priorities, and I'll just run through them. It's kind of a priority per meeting. The first one, supporting community councils to play an active role in their communities, including exploration of current legislative status, and to work together to share experience and good practice. So that was the focus of the second meeting. The first meeting was getting to know people and deciding how the group would work. So that was the first substantive meeting. The second one, which was the first one I was involved in, strengthening the role of community council liaison officers in supporting community councils, including in the provision of training and development. So this is all about actually just people sharing experiences, talking about what some of the issues are, coming up with ideas, practical ideas of what we might do going forward to meet that overall aim of strengthening community council's voice. The last one, which was only last week, increasing diversity of representation on community councils, including exploration of wider public perception and awareness of community councils. So in a sense that might get into some of the territory that Vincent was talking about in terms of demographics. And I think it's fair to say that was a very challenging discussion. Very challenging about issues of representation, diversity, things like contested elections, the lack of them, but nonetheless, whilst tricky, a very useful discussion. And the 2 to come, strengthening the link between community councils and community planning, and last but far from least, the role of community councils in project asset management and service provision, because we do know that some community councils are very interested in that kind of thing and what might be getting in the way of them growing and developing that area. Though should pause to say, also very aware that many community councils are not interested in delivering services or owning assets, regardless of how they might be configured in future. It's a very small group. Even though they have very broad and deep experience, I'm certainly clear that once those discussions have concluded, I should say that one of the interesting things is that all those 5 things are interlinked, I think. That's coming across very clearly. It's a little bit of a strange exercise to try and discuss them separately, but it was in order to try and bring some focus. They are all interlinked, so at the end of the discussions, we're going to have to reflect on the things in their totality, I suppose. And at that point, I'm certainly clear that we need to broaden the discussion. We need to be sharing with people like you some of the ideas that have come out to get your reactions so that we can take things forward. And that's sitting alongside, and to a very similar timescale, the consultation on the Community Empowerment and Renewal Bill, where we can perhaps address any legislative issues that people feel they might have. So I hope you found that helpful, with a little bit of clarity, though not saying exactly where we're going, and looking forward to the conversation later. Thank you.
Can I just say to you that, well, you've actually got a document in your pack. If you look at page 3, for example, those 5 very important objectives of the Short Life group are there in black and white in front of you. So I'd imagine that is it the website that you're wanting to know, sir? It's there, isn't it? Okay, right. No, there's a question time coming, unless this is a kind of point of order, as it were, because these guys are going to be up on the platform and you can put it behind your ear and ask them everything after you've heard the next 2 speakers. Is that all right? Obviously not, but we can... will these talks go on the website?
The PowerPoints will, and the film will also go on the website.
Right, the PowerPoints will. There's also a film going on. Hello, Mr. Film. What's your name? Ian. You're Ian the Film, right? Okay. So Ian's filming this, and where are you going to put that on the website as well? By gum. Okay, so yes. Any other kind of order questions? I should have reminded you at the start that if there is a fire alarm, it's for real. And you go where the little man with the green, the running green man tells you to go. Those 2 exits, which are probably the only ones you would choose. The other thing is mobile phones. Can you just switch them off or put them on silent or whatever if you haven't already done that? Right, let's move on to our next speaker, Rory Mair, who's Chief Executive of CoSLA. Rory's been in that post since 2002. Before that, he was Director of Aviemore Projects for Highlands and Islands Enterprise. He doesn't want any arguments about why you got rid of those nice little dodgems that we used to use. We used to come over from Belfast every year to see my grandparents in Wick, and we managed to stay calm in the car as long as we could get to the dodgems in Aviemore. And then someone got rid of them, Rory. Okay, so... So there's that issue. More importantly, before local or after local government reorganisation, he was for a short time Strategic Director for Social Strategy with Fife Council, and before government reorganisation, he was Chief Executive of Ross and Cromarty. So he's been in a lot of different roles within local government. And it says here, I mean, only a man with such a long pedigree could have 10 years described as 10 years in a variety of less senior local government posts before all of that. So if we've got Ian the Film, I think we've got Rory the Council. When I asked him what I should say about him as a person, he wanted to say he currently has no functioning liver. Rory is waiting for a transplant. He has a mobile in his pocket that hopefully will go off any time. But if you're looking at him and thinking he looks a bit peely-wally, except the opposite of that, that is his problem at the moment. So, delighted he's here. He's full of energy in the mornings. Didn't spare him when it comes to the questions. Here comes Rory Mair.
Well, thanks very much for inviting me. I won't ask for any audience participation at this point. I'm very pleased to be here. I think I spoke at one of your conferences in Clydebank Town Hall. That must be 10 years ago or more. I must have been awful because it's taken you 10 years to invite me back. So I'll try and do better this time. I think the other thing to say is, although I am, of course, Chief Executive of CoSLA, and I can't get away from that, some of the things I want to say are my own personal views about community councils and the position of representative democracy in this country. I can't be 100% certain that all of them are mirrored by my political masters at CoSLA. Some of them will be, some of them won't be, but I think you asked to hear what I wanted to say, so I hope you'll allow me to say that. I think the other thing to say is something just a little bit about my personal credentials here. Unusually for a chief executive in local government, my background is in community development. I started out as somebody who wanted to ensure that local communities had the skills to be determinant of their own future, that the things that communities receive should be determined by the community, that solutions should be local, and that communities should be empowered. And I've carried that through as best I can all the work that I've done. And I do agree with some of the things that Leslie said. I do believe in representative democracy and participative democracy, but I do think one of the things wrong with this country just now is that we are constantly driven by this view that we are overrepresented. We're not overrepresented, we're underrepresented. And not just, you could have more numbers, we're underrepresented in the sense of underrepresented by people who are local enough, who have real power to make a difference to what's going on in their local communities. It's not just a question of numbers, it's a question of what authority and what abilities you have to make a difference. I think it's interesting that just as Leslie's learning with the Scandinavian experience, when it comes to the quality of our services, how we do in health, how we do in education, Everybody points to Scandinavia and says, well, why is it like that there and why is it not like that here? Well, one of the answers is because they do trust representative democracy at a local level to come up with local solutions that will solve local problems. We don't quite trust that yet. And I would like to see more trust placed in a level of democracy below that of councils that actually drove this agenda forward. So I'm coming to this question that you asked me to address. What are the opportunities for community councils from that background? And intuitively, I think the opportunities are enormous, but they won't just fall into your lap. We've got to think through how you secure these opportunities for local community councils or a level of local democracy of that sort. I suppose the first thing I want to say is there is a massive problem in this country about the delivery of public services. And to some extent that problem is so overwhelming that if you cannot locate yourself, and this is the truth for councils, for community councils, for quangos, for government, if you cannot locate yourself as part of the solution to the problem we're facing, then you ain't relevant. So it's important, I know this may not be what you were expecting to encounter from me this morning, but it's important for me to spend a little time understanding the problem. And I'm sorry if, because of the stage being quite low, some folk at the back can't see the bottom of the slide, but I'll try and describe it. What this shows, if you like, in the red line, is the demand for public services in this country. And you can see that it's going up dramatically between now and 2017, 2018. What you see here is the best estimate of the resources we've got to meet that demand. So what happens is, over the next 6, 7, 8 years, and it won't get better after that, we have a situation where the resources we have to meet the requirements we've got simply don't match up. In other words, we are going to hit an incredible barrier in terms of public services, which means the way we deliver public services just now, the people we deliver them to, the cost of those services, cannot be sustained over the next 7 or 8 years. It is simply impossible. There is not enough money in the country to drive the method of service delivery we've got now. And it's not going to be solved by saying let's have 25 councils rather than 32 or anything like that. It's only going to be solved by a fundamental review of the way in which we deliver services and our understanding of how that makes a difference to people's lives.
Rory, you need to use the
Sorry. Sorry. I think the other thing I want to mention about this gap is that it's driven by an issue of demand. Even if we didn't have the loss of resources we've got an increase in demand in this country, partly driven by the demographics of the country, but we've got an increase in demand. And that demand is itself driven by a failure. It's driven by a failure to intervene early enough. What we do in this country is we wait for problems to occur and we throw money at solving them. And it's bad for the people who have the problems, and it's a tremendously expensive way of delivering public services. So there are two issues here. There's the overall issue that we simply don't have the money to carry on doing what we're doing, and there's the other issue is that because we are driven by meeting the costs of problems once they've occurred and we don't intervene early enough, we have casualties of the system. Now, I can just describe what I mean by that. The health service in this country spends £10 billion. Local government spends £10 billion. Government's direct agencies spend about £10 billion. £1 billion of the health service budget is spent on the emergency admission of older people to hospital, which, when they're reviewed, have no legitimate medical reason. In other words, what happens is somebody encounters a problem in their home and the GP thinks the best thing to do is to send them to hospital for treatment. They don't need to be in hospital. It's an expensive place to be, and people tend to come out of hospital less enabled than when they went in, but that's what happens. £1 billion 10% of the budget is spent on acute provision, when in fact we should be spending that on preventative spend in people's homes in order to keep them in their houses safer for more of their life. Now that's replicated in the way we deal with criminal justice issues, where we lock more people up than any other country in Scotland, in any other country in Europe, but we don't actually solve crimes by doing that or keep communities safe. It's replicated in the way we deal with unemployment, where we pay for huge numbers of people to be unemployed rather than investing in youth employment schemes that would get people into a different situation. So we've got two problems here. One is the gap that we've got, and the other is this move towards preventative spend. Now, the question is, if that's the problem, what are some of the solutions? And I'm going to use some of the issues that were used by the previous speaker. Christy said, the solutions are these. You've got to focus on preventative spend, you've got to integrate locally, you've got to have transparent performance management so the money you are spending actually does what it's supposed to do, and you've got to have a workforce in its broader sense in the public sector that is capable of doing that. Now, when Christy was talking about the public sector, he was talking about you as well. He was talking about all the agencies of the public sector, all of those people who had a statutory part to play in public services in this country. But crucially, and it was raised by the previous speaker, underpinning all of that was Christy saying, and you can do what you like, but if you don't do it with more reference to communities and what communities want out of this, it doesn't matter if you do these four things, you'll fail, because services have got to be provided from an understanding of what the community needs in a way that the community wants and to a standard that the community expects and can verify. So Christy is an absolute advocate of local community participation in some quite big public sector changes that he's talking about. At the apex, there was mention of public sector reform from your chairperson at the beginning. At the apex of public sector reform, there's been a review of community planning, and it may or may not find its way into the Community Empowerment Bill. What that community planning process will do, that review will do, is place new duties on the statutory parts of the public sector. It will give them new powers. It will give a new commitment to community involvement. So what it will say is that it is not good enough for community planning to be done without being legitimised by local communities. It will not be good enough for councils and their partners to come up with plans for what they want to see happening in their area without being able to demonstrate they've gone forward with a fundamental programme of community involvement leading to those plans. When we do performance management, we will no longer be able to do that ourselves looking at what we've done. We will have to involve communities. And in all of those areas of community involvement, we need partners who can bring the community into contact with us to inform the way in which we do business. So, is there an opportunity for community councils there? I think there is, and I think it's an opportunity that you have to be prepared to take. The essence of community planning is going to be these 4 or 5 areas. 1, accurate community profiling. What is actually going on in communities? Not what's going on in something as big as Glasgow, but what's going on in bits of Glasgow that would represent local communities. And we've got to do that by involving the community. We've got to understand local need, not council-wide need. Highland Council's far too big an area to say that the need in one part of it's the same as the need in another part. We've got to get to local need. We've got to develop programmes that meet those needs. So we can't just be doing services that leave the problems that are being identified unaddressed. And we've got to be able to deliver efficient programmes that meet that need. And that we've got to have performance management that demonstrate the outcomes have changed. And all of that's got to be done. The law will say, I think, all of that's got to be done being legitimised by the communities, not being legitimised just by the council or just by the government or just by the agencies, but being legitimised by the communities who we're trying to deliver services for. So there's a huge problem in Scotland. We're starting to think of solutions. My message, I think, to you, my first message to you is, You have to understand that context, because there is no opportunity for community councils in the abstract. The opportunity is that you are absolutely relevant to the agenda we're addressing, and if you can show that, the opportunities are enormous. No one's going to give you this. It's going to be something you have to show relevance to. The last point I would make, and this may seem unfair, is are community councils genuinely well enough organised to take advantage of that opportunity? At the moment, I would say no. Just as 10 years ago when I came to CoSLA, we weren't well organised to take advantage of this opportunity. And there are some similarities between your situation and ourselves in CoSLA. We represent 32 councils in Scotland. We've got to be relevant locally. That means we've got to be doing a job that our local communities understand and value, and we've got to be relevant nationally. And we've had to learn the skills of being relevant nationally. We've had to find quality political leadership. We've had to find a way of being important to government and other partners in order to take the opportunities. You're going to have to do the same. That's not a criticism of what's gone before. It's to say that's going to be what's important in the coming years. It's that you've got the ability to take the opportunity. It won't simply be given to you. And I have to answer a question. Leslie asked it of me in our chat beforehand. If government want to do something and we say no, and there's been a good example, CoSLA, as you know, did not want a single police force or single fire service for Scotland. We thought it was an appalling centralisation of services. We said that to government and they said, we don't care what you say, we're doing it anyway. The question I have to ask myself as the person whose duty it is to add value to local councils is, if I'm that easily ignored, what am I doing wrong? I can't just say they've ignored me, they're bad people and that's their problem. It's my problem. So for you, the challenge is the same. If you are being ignored in the way this agenda is being driven forward, part of that responsibility is on the big agencies to respond properly. Part of it's on you to say, if we're being ignored, what do we have to do differently? So my message is, there is an opportunity. You've got to consider, how can we take that opportunity and how do we have to organise ourselves to make the best use of it? I'm an advocate of community councils, and anything that we have learned about how we represent ourselves nationally, we would willingly pass on and work with you about how you move forward as well. I hope that's been a useful exposition of the difficulties that we face, and I hope it provides some enthusiasm and some optimism that there is a role for community councils going forward. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much indeed, Rory. If that's Rory working on 2 cylinders, you must be pretty scary when you're going full tilt. Now, Oliver Escobar is our third speaker of the morning, and I hope you're filing all these questions behind your ear, or if you're like me, write it down. I always forget the stuff I want to ask if I didn't write it down first, because we're going to have questions after this, and do focus then. Anyway, Oliver is our third speaker. He's Project Officer of the Public Policy Network at Edinburgh University. Now, it did strike me that the community council sector has some guy-long names in it, but actually Oliver's one kind of takes the biscuit here. He is currently also a Principals Career Development PhD scholar at the School of Social and Political Sciences, brackets, University of Edinburgh. Right, so we get that he's an academic and that what he's involved in principally is trying to get citizen participation, communication policy looked at from both the academic and the sort of real life dimensions. Knowledge transfer, as they say. So let's hear what he has to say. Would you please welcome Oliver Escobar?
Thank you, Leslie. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me. As Leslie said, my name is Oliver Escobar. As you can gather by my accent, I'm from Edinburgh. And I actually come from Galicia, which is in the northwest of Spain. It's a Celtic country as well, so very similar to Scotland. That's why I came here. That's one of the reasons I came here. One of the things that strikes me from the institutional landscape in Scotland, as Leslie pointed out earlier on, is the size of your councils. And just to put it in perspective, I grew up in a wee town in the north of Galicia. My council is 3,500 people. That is my council. There are 330 councils in Galicia. Galicia is only one of 17 regions in Spain. So it's quite a different structure. So I thought I could just mention that. I come from that type of perspective. As Leslie pointed out, I'm half an academic, but also a practitioner, and I've done various things regarding my main interest, which is citizen participation. I'm interested in democracy, and I'm interested in the next form of democracy. What shape is it going to take? What kind of democracy we want next? So that's what I want to talk about today, and hopefully kind of put to you a provocation for discussion. And the provocation is about your role in creating that kind of new democracy. The advantage of Scotland is that it's got the right size to do this type of thing. And there are many models we can look at. I'll mention some of them very quickly. Leslie has referred to the Nordic countries, and that's a very clear one. But this is a much more broad movement around the world. It's a global movement to move from what we call representative democracy, the political parties game, to participatory democracy, a new type of democracy. So that's what I want to talk about today. Those are the basic ideas, I guess, of the, and admittedly, I'm going to be very, very blunt and simplistic about these things. It's just to kind of stimulate the discussion. But we are all familiar with representative democracy. It's all about the electoral cycles, the political parties, electoral dynamics, not necessarily about the things that matter in everyday life to people. And the key actor is the representative. There are all sorts of problems with this model, and I won't have time to go into that, but I'll mention some in a second. The model that I'm talking about, and it's not a model that kind of supersedes or substitutes representative democracy, it rather overlaps it and develops it, deepens it, has to do with actually creating ongoing processes rather than going along electoral cycles. And the key figure here, and here is where, in my view, you come in, is the deliberative practitioner, a very different type of actor from the representative. I'll go into that in a second. So that's my main argument, and I hope that then we can discuss it. You're all familiar with the critiques of democracy as it is. Party politics, electoral games, citizens are disenfranchised, one of those words that took me the 6 years I've been here to learn. There is the issue of citizens avoiding politics, because as soon as you say politics or you say policy, what comes to mind is party politics. That is actually very convenient. I always tell my students, and years ago I used to teach in a high school, and they used to tell me, politics is so uncool. And it's all because we define politics according to the politics with big P, the kind of politics that we get told about in BBC time and again. But we get told very little about politics with the little p, all the micro actions, the micro politics of things that you guys deal with every day. And apathy is a convenient truth. As long as our youngsters, our young people, and keep thinking politics is not worth it, is that game of that elite, that works well for the system. That's not going to change things. It just leaves things as they are. So it's not surprised that governments are not interested in deepening citizen participation. It just goes against their very, very nature. Apathy is a convenient myth. And you know this very well. As soon as there is something that bothers people, you get tons, you get hundreds of people on the streets, you get millions. In Spain, we did change our government when our government decided to go to the Iraq war. A few weeks later, we changed the government. People do get involved, but they don't like the political game as it is. So all of this comes to this idea of government as a set of elitist practices. politicians, party politics, and then technocracy. The system that has served us well for around 200 or 300 years, arguably, but we need to change and we need to evolve, or that's what I think. So what's going on elsewhere? I brought a few pictures just to give you a flavor that this is not pie in the sky, this is not academic theory. Ideas around citizen participation have been there since the 60s. There are all sorts of models and all sorts of ideas. There is no one right way. It's all actually open, and it's something that we're making as we go. But that's the Constitutional Assembly in Iceland, which Leslie is quite familiar with. These are citizens. They remade the country's constitution. That's the European Consensus Conference. That's America Speaks. That's participatory budgeting on the streets of Brazil, where citizens decide how budgets are spent. Conversation cafes. The British Columbia Citizens Assembly, where British Columbia wanted to reform their electoral system, instead of doing what we did here in the UK, to have that sort of referendum that actually became a referendum on the Lib Dems and nothing else, really. And that was hardly an example of democratic innovation at all. It was more of another party political game. What they did in British Columbia was very simple. They thought, this is an issue that parties have a vested interest in. So we cannot leave it to political parties to decide how they are going to get elected. So they chose 100 citizens randomly selected from the population, cutting by gender, ethnicity, geography, and they gave them time and resources. And research tells us that time and again, when citizens are given time and resources, they make better policy than the current systems and communities we have. That's Occupy Wall Street, another whole area. It's happening in Spain as well. It's happening in the Arab Spring. That's one of my favorite. Two girls on the floor, on the street, around a circle, beginning a street dialogue, just like that. Anyway. So one of my arguments is, I think, and this is just my view, that community councils have for too long been modeled. I mean, community councils began as this very, very exciting democratic innovation in the 70s. So I just wonder if we can get back to that, to be at the cutting edge of what's happening elsewhere as well. At that point in the 70s, community councils were something that other countries looked at and thought, wow, that's the direction we surely want to go. The problem, in my view, is that we have modeled our community councils on the institutions of representative democracy. We have made them formal. We have thought of community councillors as representatives. We have inherited all the problems that representative democracy brings with it. We have kind of replicated with different sorts of formats and dynamics, but in essence replicating as if we were just a replica of councils or governments or the committee model, that sort of way of working. And that's, in my view, what's stopping community councils from harnessing all the energy of all the community councillors that get involved in so many processes around the country. So, can we reimagine community councils as institutions of that participatory democracy? And what would this mean? And I read this for those on the back. I think it means changing practices, but more importantly, it means changing our mindset. How about, can we think of community councillors not as representatives, but as deliberative practitioners? And I'll say what that is in a second. Can we think of ourselves not as representatives, as councillors or politicians see themselves as representatives? And can we see ourselves as facilitators, community organizers? So what does a deliberative practitioner do? Well, as I say, it's a facilitator of public dialogue and deliberation. It's someone who creates a hub where the community comes and makes decisions about everyday things. It's a curator of participatory processes, someone that is less interested in putting forward his or her own views and more interested in gathering the views that come from the community. Reskilling. This is about dialogic communication skills. For those of you interested, I brought a free resource that we wrote last year, and it's available on the reception table, I think. But it's about dialogic communication skills, facilitation, mediation, how to become that person that becomes the nodal point of community processes. Not to then represent them, but to enable them to gather and create one voice about specific issues. And we have hundreds of new participatory formats that are being used all around the world. I've just listed a few. There are tons. There are plenty of formats, plenty of processes, plenty of ways of doing this. Citizen juries, conversation cafes, the planning cells, all sorts of things. Dialogue groups, Samoan circles, one of my favorite. There are as many formats as you can imagine. And they're all quite fit for specific things. And it's just a matter of fitting formats to processes. So those are the tools. Finally, so thinking about potential futures. I'm not saying this should be the way. I'm only saying this could be a way. There might be others. I just wonder, how do we get beyond modeling our community councils around the same sort of ideas, dynamics, structures as other institutions that we are actually trying to reform anyway. Let's move from committees to forums. Let's go from a mindset of representing communities to mediating them by using processes that help to gather those community views. Harness the power of e-participation. This is no secret. This is the future. We gotta get on with this. There are countries that are looking at how to actually make policy by using computers, so that you harness the power of an entire country thinking, pondering over complex issues. We gotta get updated on that sort of thing. How about we let communities decide how their community council should work instead of the legislation? This is not going to be popular with the government, but it's just that I think that this needs to come from the bottom up. One model is not going to work everywhere. That's what I've seen during my research in Scotland. That's my impression, that's my view. Innovating. There are all sorts of ways of representing communities in new ways. I've mentioned earlier on random sampling. Sortition is one of my favorites. That's what the Greeks used to do. So that any citizen at any point can be elected to be part of a process that is going to decide on a particular issue. That avoids the entrenchment of dynamics that political parties bring with them, because those citizens get in the spotlight, are watched over by a public with the help of the media, and are put together to make a decision on specific issues, and need to give public reasons rather than private reasons. Perspective representation. Maybe it's not about having everyone in the room, or trying to do that, which is always difficult, sometimes impossible, but about having all the different perspectives. And we're not good at this enough. We're not good at doing disagreement. We're not good at dissensus. We usually create dynamics that seem to create consensus because we don't have the voices that would differ. I don't think, and Alice there will forgive me for this, but I don't think the national government can solve this issue. I don't think one size is going to fit all. I think community councils, each community council in each area needs to look for its own way of working. There are problems. Yeah, the legislation tells you you should behave and work in particular ways, but that's changeable. That's changeable, especially if you get the mandate that participatory processes can give you. If you actually use a participatory process that comes up with specific decisions that are backed by a whole community after a rigorous participatory process, you got a mandate that you can take to decision-making tables and reshape agendas like the community planning agenda. No council, no partner sitting at a particular community planning partnership is going to tell you, no, we're not going to listen to you because you're not representative, when you have gathered the views of your entire community through an ambitious participatory process. They cannot afford that. They'll be shooting on their own feet. And shooting, I said, right? I'm going to finish with this. So that's the localism and community planning agendas. See, Community planning itself is an area where we can observe how the state, the local state, is creating this new type of deliberative practitioner. Local community planning officers, neighborhood planning officers, are deliberative practitioners or are modeling themselves on that. We can argue and discuss. What I'm saying here is that they're not going to be able to do everything that they want to do. And that's what I think community councils have an immense potential, reinventing themselves as institutions of participatory democracy on the ground, and by harnessing the power of becoming that nodal actor that brings together communities through those sorts of processes. So I guess my message is a positive one. There are ways forward. I'm not saying this is the one, this could be one. But the bottom line for me is representative democracy as it is no longer enough for the aspirations of many. And I know many of the people who have those aspirations are in this room today, and I hope we get somewhere with our discussions. And thank you.
Righty-ho. Well, could we have the three speakers up at the front? I've just been realising what the obvious problem with this is, which is you haven't got microphones. One for them. They're going to have to be nice to each other then. Have you not got, do these not work, the lapel microphones? Is that going to be a hassle? If it is, don't worry. It's just you've got enough, have you, that you could? Yeah? Okay, chaps, why don't you take your seats in the meantime? We'll get the technicals sorted out. Could you, for the moment, help here, or actually, is that another one there that would work? Let's just sort the guys at the front out first. Right, hang on a wee sec till we just get ourselves sorted out. Yes, thanks. No, I'll take this. Right. Okay. Can we just let me just check that we get the sound right first. There's no point in us getting. Right. So can we just hear along from everybody? What's your star sign, Alistair?
Aquarius.
I could have guessed that actually. Oliver?
That's Libra.
Libra.
Capricorn.
Right. Oliver, you sound the quietest of the bunch. Can you pull yours just up a bit, or else I imagine in your Galician way you will start bellowing once you start speaking for a while.
Is that better?
If it took you 6 years to work out how to say disenfranchise, I can't even now say advertisement properly, so you're in very good company. Right, Chibi. Okay, so there's lots of questions, and it's good that they all come. Right. Let's start with yourself. Now, it's not that I think anyone's a maniac in the room. I'm just going to hang on to the microphone, right? Because it's just that most people use it like that and can't hear anything. Okay?
Well, I'll try and put the two questions into one. Dennis Shovlin, Larbert Stennismuir, Torwood Community Council in the Falkirk area. My area seems to have the opposite view officially. As I'm their delegate, I have to represent their view. On one hand, our community council feel that more powers are not good as we are not equipped to take on these new powers. We're not...
Did you write this, Dennis?
Yes. On the other hand, our local authority did away with forums because they were not well attended and in favour of community councils because we were elected. What's your view on this?
I didn't understand the last bit. The council did away with what?
They did away with the forums, the local area forums. They were not very well attended until there was a really pressing issue. And they felt it was not a good investment. So they did away with these local area forums. I felt it was a great pity, but I'm not here to represent my view.
Right, okay, that's a baffling, slightly amalgam of two separate thoughts, really. But what you're saying is that, I mean, as I understand it, the average community council gets a glorious £400 a year to run. Is that right? No, yes, average, right. Ah, right, okay, so how much would you be running on then? Tell me, for administration or whatever.
It's about 1,000, varies between 1,500, something like that.
Can I just say, sir, you're the only chap with that natty kind of suit in here, and it's nice that you're the one that's got the money organised. But okay, it's 400 to 1,000. I'm not trying to be too cheeky, but a wee bit.
Can I just say that Musselburgh Community Council in East Lothian gets 25,000 a year annual budget from East Lothian Council.
Right, and how... Okay, actually, while we're at it, is that the most? Is this the most in the room? Right, you know that, do you?
Yeah, I've got the paper here, I can show you.
How did that happen?
We introduced local priority schemes in East...
Excuse me a second, why would you not want to hear this, folks? Listen.
Yeah, we introduced local priority schemes in East Lothian, where some of the money that came from the various budgets in East Lothian Council were given out to community councils to enable them to do capital projects. And for instance, in Longniddry, I'm part of a very small community council, Longniddry. We managed to use £3,000 of that in attract match funding and built a £65,000 play area for the children. So we, although that's a large sum of money, we've attracted millions of match funding over and above that.
Right, do you own that field?
Do I own that field?
Does the community council own the playing field?
The council owns the playing field, but we put in a play park area within it.
Right, the play park, sorry, but I mean, what you've built, do you own?
No, we've transferred the ownership of that and the maintenance of that over to the East Lothian Council.
So what was your part in it, apart from being a way to raise other money?
We decided what we wanted to go in there. We formed a working group with mothers and people that wanted to get involved in it. They applied to various different groups for match funding. They brought that together. They designed what was going to go in there, along with the people that knew what should and gave them the choice of what should go in. And then they supervised the construction of it to make sure what was done.
And day-to-day management now is done by?
East Lothian Council.
And is it all right?
Yeah, it's fine. It's great.
But if it wasn't?
What do you mean if it wasn't?
How would you have an input now?
If we had an input now, we'd have to address that with the officers who were looking after it. And we'd speak to the officers and make sure that they knew what was wrong, and we'd come in agreement about what should happen. We have continuous budgets and can do something similar again if there needed to be an extension of it. For instance, we needed to put in additional drainage after that because it wasn't working very well, and we put in additional fencing after that that was required. So it's a continuous thing. It's not just a one-off.
Right.
The European fund. How money come from the European fund?
We got it from a number of sources. No, the £3,000 came from the council as part of our capital. No, the 25.
Stop. Right. Now, it's good to get enough detail to see that there's a variety of ways of doing stuff in the room. And your man who has disappeared was saying his council don't want more powers, and you're cheerfully taking on more powers, but not up to the point, for example, like a trust that might be running the whole shebang. You basically have kind of shaped it, helped fund it, and then management of it's gone back to the council. Right, okay. You don't think you have the capacity to do more?
No.
Right, why not?
It's very difficult. There is a problem with capacity, and the capacity is, while we've got people that can set things up, to keep them running on a continual basis just takes that much more resources from the local community, and it's difficult to be able to attract that.
Let me put that back to Rory, actually, because you had put that challenge out to people, saying you have to be relevant. You have to be able to provide something to be able to. How can you not be ignored? Now, the difficulty here is, here are some folk who have done part of the job for a local authority, but wouldn't, even despite all of that, don't feel there's any way they could continue to manage it. Do you expect somehow, for example, this bunch, the future for them should be in Musselburgh, that they kind of move on to take that whole service over, for example?
No, and I didn't say that you gained relevance by delivering services. I said you gained relevance in the ways that Escobar is mentioning by saying we are sufficiently imbued with community knowledge that we won't tolerate you making those decisions without us being involved. And I think what you're seeing is a local government situation which is very willing to see community councils as agents, because that's very comfortable for us. We're used to giving people money to do bits and bobs for us. That doesn't challenge the fundamental issue that you want to represent communities. I'm not saying it's not a good thing to do. It is a good thing to do. But it's something we're comfortable with. I think what Escobar was outlining and what I think the future is a much greater role, not in the planning of just one element of service, but of saying, well, if a council's got a budget of, £200 million, what part are community councils going to play in the allocation of that? So I don't think we should get defined by the services we deliver. That's a dead end. What we should be defined by is the extent to which we're able to bring a local democratic view to decision making.
Okay, I can see that Alistair, or should we call him McKinlay, with your charming habit, Mair, of giving everyone a... I know Oliver's surname is so delicious, you just want to say it over and over again, but nonetheless, he is Oliver. Right, I'm working my way round.
Risha Holmes, Fairley Community Council. We're a very small village and we have 2 nuclear power stations, a proposal for a coal-fired power station, offshore wind turbines being set up very close to the village. And we would like to be involved a lot more. We would like to see the Scottish Government giving us a confirmation that we will be consulted on NPF 3. We weren't on NPF 2, so we want to be statutory consultees on anything in NPF 3.
Can you translate that for me?
Oh, National Planning Framework 3. We would also like to be consulted on flood risk management and the plans and maps that the local authorities and SEPA are drawing up, because we feel we have, knowledge of the locality and the floods and everything else. And we also would like to know how we can get support for expert witnesses in relation to participation in public inquiries, like the one that's probably going to come about for the coal-fired power station.
That's quite good to begin on with. Can I just say, Alistair, you can answer this first of all, but can I just see in the room, on NPF 3, I could hear you were saying, yep, how many people would like to be statutory consultees within NPF 3? Is that it right? Okay, how many people would like that? Okay, but can we just live with that as a kind of question? How many people would not like to be statutory consultees? How many people, and the majority of you didn't vote? Are you just kind of confused? Right, I'm glad I'm not the only one. Okay, do you want to say briefly what NPF 3 is?
I think it's the Scottish Government's planning for the future, and National Planning Framework 2. The one thing that bothered us was that it seemed to be a plan for a coal-fired power station was slipped in at the last minute, and the local authority were consulted on it, are statutory consultees, but the local people are not.
Alistair.
I'll certainly take that back to my planning colleagues, and just to be clear, this is not actually this is not the same planning we've been talking about in terms of planning services, that broad issue of community planning. This is the physical planning system. And one of the things that has really struck me since coming to this job is the very particular thing that your involvement in the planning system seems to maybe do to these broader issues around the deliberative participative democracy that Oliver talks about. Some community councils I speak to, they're really not that bothered about planning. Some community councils, it seems to be the only thing they're involved in, and it comes with a lot of risk, it comes with a lot of work, it comes with a lot of grief. And understanding how that particular role that you play may or may not, how it fits into the future of community councils, I think is going to be critical. So please do tell us all about that once we get into the broader discussions about the recommendations from the Short Life Working Group, and if there are any legislative issues coming through in the bill.
Okay, but can I ask you something, Alistair? I mean, we are here with a very large representative group of community councils. If there's anything you need to know, I'm sure they can feed into your consultation processes, but you can ask them. They're in the room. I don't want to try and second guess a question because I'm the least expert person in the room, but I can see that they're here and you're here. And there's a moment, right? So, for example, do you want to ask how many councils want to input into planning? I don't know if that's the right thing to ask, but you do.
Certainly, I'm quite happy to ask that, but I'll ask it slightly differently.
What would you like to answer as a question?
I would like you to answer why the council,
Is this about the planning thing? We're going on to the next issues next.
The council refused to recognise the Dunblane District Community Council under 51 section of the 1973 Act had the right to represent the community. They refused to accept that. Where do we go now? Tell me, where do we go when they do that? They refused to accept that we had the power to represent the community and a planning issue, planning application. So where do you go then? We will refuse that opportunity.
Okay, you've made your point.
Yeah, I would write to the Minister, I suspect.
Minister, the Chief of Agreement.
Beg your pardon?
Right. Can we just keep where we were at the moment? Ask the question, if you would.
Can you put your hand up, please, if you're currently happy with the role you play in the planning system?
You need to give everyone the full options before they're able to choose the one they want. So run through what the options are. He's working for his money. I know you're thinking on your feet, but just go for it.
I am thinking on my feet because it wasn't suggested that I come along with a prepared list of questions to ask colleagues at this point.
Okay, but then I'll think of them. It's just fine. If you want to leave it to me, I'll do it.
Happy for you to do that.
Right. But the question is, are people happy with the planning input you have at the moment? Would you like to have more input or less? Seems to be the only logical options you have. Now, I know there's all sorts of issues you could have. Sorry. That's the way you're speaking at the moment is guaranteed to be the only way. I can't hear you. Sorry. Adrian, nobody can hear you without the microphone.
Adrian Wake, East Strathern Community Council, Perth and Kinross. I'm simply asking Leslie to define planning. In other words, there are two clear differences. There's national planning, such as the power station that the lady referred to, and there's local planning, which is where the house goes up next door to you, or the development in the field. Well,
right, so can I just ask you a question, and then I'll move on. All I'm trying at the moment to do, in your last meeting with the ASCC, is to try and clarify for people whose responsibility in government is to take on all these issues. If it's possible to have a useful snapshot of your opinion right now, I'd like to take it. If I'm getting the question wrong, refine it for me. Alistair's job is not to come here and ask questions because he'll get his knuckles rapped if he asked it wrong. So all I'm saying to you is, then you suggest how I should ask that well, or otherwise we'll move on.
Well, I've said all I need to say.
Right, okay. Well, then we can't ask the question, and perhaps that speaks volumes about the difficulty of the sector. Right, so let's get back to where we were. I think actually, Rory, can you have a thought about just this exactly? We can't even define what question we could usefully ask about the level of planning that people are involved in. So, can I ask you something? Is it Dennis? Yeah, don't shout out because we can't hear you, right? Okay, let me just wait till I get the microphone to you.
My Community Council view and our planning convener's view, Bill Robertson's view, is that we are not getting the planning applications in time. Falkirk Council are willy-nilly and they're giving us about a week beforehand, and we're not getting enough time to consultate on these things, which I think has got to change, and it's got to change now.
Okay. Yes. Well, no, say something.
Strathern Community Council, I would like to endorse that. That's our main concern, that we only meet once a month, and the plans tend to come the day after we've had a meeting and we've got 2 weeks to reply. We fortunately have somebody who is an expert planner on our committee, which helps us, but we still wonder whether the council take any interest in the replies that we give.
And what would be a reasonable period of time, do you think? What would be reasonable notice?
I would say 6 weeks.
Right, can I ask Rory, as somebody who works in a council, is 6 weeks' notice of planning decisions a reasonable thing that councils could deliver to community councils?
I can't answer it. I just can't answer it. I don't work in a council at the moment, so I can't answer the question exactly. I don't want to pretend I do. I want community councils, amongst other things, to have access to the planning issues in the right time. That's what we have aimed to do. If we're not doing it, then of course we've got to rectify that. The question is, for me, in one sense though, there are 1,200, I think, community councils in Scotland. There are 1,200 councillors in Scotland, 1,200 local authority councillors. You're more powerful than us in one sense. Why are we not? How does this get negotiated now? Because it seemed to me that your demand would be unstoppable if it was articulated in that kind of powerful way. But it's not.
Right, can I just say a couple of things here? One is, can you not do that? Because it just means everybody thinks the only way they can be heard is to shout. I appreciate it's frustrating because I'm trying to move around the room. Have we got another microphone? We do. Okay. I also realise that planning is on the agenda for this afternoon, which is what you're pointing out. All I'm trying to say is that the people who are in charge of how structures work are only here this morning. So if you want to make a point about that, make it. But I quite take the point there are other things to say. Now, it's difficult because I don't know, there's 10 hands up, and I don't know which points you all want to make. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to race around everybody, okay, to let your points be heard. And then could you at the top take the 2 or 3 things that seem most relevant to you, right? So can you find a person on that side of the room, and we'll go side about to try and hear points. I'm hoping this speaker isn't going to go woo with this microphone. Do you need your specs on to speak? No, I'm going to hang on to it, James. Sorry, it's just away.
We're about 10% away down the route of changing this. The aims and objectives in any group I've been involved in over the last 25 years, that's the first part. What you have to move on to now, if we're serious, is what was listed as new duties, new powers, a new commitment to community involvement, and have a proper consultation on that quickly, effectively, and see what framework we've got. At present, we're only fractionally into this. We can be stopped there and get no further, and it'll become a talking shop. We need to get into what you said, Rory, get good consultation on that and get out and put that into place. If we're going, and the point linked to that is, are our committees or our community councils able to take that on? Will they be motivated to take on these things unless they feel it's worthwhile? So the motivation comes from the empowerment.
And so do you want to have a new consultation on community councils alone to ask these things?
I think we want to go quickly from the aims, which are very, very well set out. I've seen these kind of aims many times before. It's a good set of aims, a good set of objectives and principles. We have to quickly say then, how do we translate that into delivery? What is the options? Let's consult on the options, get them spelled out, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, under the various things, talk to people about them and put them in place. Because you're never going to get the community councils to be more organised unless they feel it's a worthwhile and a good forum to operate from.
Okay, got that, James? Other side of the room? I
was going to make a statement which I want the others to comment on, really summarising what Leslie started at the beginning and almost what Mr Escobar Oliver said later on, that local government in this country is effectively broke. Not financially, but broken full stop, because its government sees it as a lovely arm's-length body. If things go well, the government will take the credit for the initiative it has sponsored. If things go wrong, they will blame the local government. They've got somebody else to blame. And it's all top down, and local government, of course, is now wanting to set up arm's-length trusts of its own that it can then blame if things go wrong. And we have a real fundamental brokenness in the whole structure. And I think that's almost what Leslie was saying at the beginning, and I think it's what Oliver was saying at the end. I'm just wondering what the others think about the situation.
Okay, and here?
Jennifer Woodward from Sandbank Community Council. We have a community council and a community trust, and we work very closely together. We have a 50-50 in our community council, where we put 50% of the money back into the community. We've recently got a play park, which we've got by raising money through doing bagpacks and all sorts of other things. We have a gala day for the community to put something back into the community. And we also have a local planning group that we attend. We have a police report every month. We have a councillor's report every month. And we have various different people that come to talk to the community councils. And if we have any problems, we put it out to the community. We have a sandbank scene paper, which we do twice a year, and we ballot the community and ask for their input as to what they want to do about things. We focus on...
Jennifer, can you just... You're coming to a question here, aren't you, girl?
We focus on local businesses to give them a boost. And why, have other community councils got similar things? Because we find that we get on quite well with the local council if we get together and try and do things. And one example of something which has happened recently is that they closed the hospice, and local pressure. Eventually, in the forums that we have actually got the hospice back open again. All right, it might not be the same as in the same form as it was, but we have actually got something.
So basically, you're quite happy with the amount of clout you have within your lives?
Well, we ask the local people, and it's getting them to put forward their opinions, and we try to do the best we can for the community.
Right, okay, thank you for that. Other side? Yes?
Donald Boyd from the West Hill Community Council in Inverness, where the University of the Highlands and Islands is trying to build its complex, where Transport Scotland, Highland Council and Highlands and Islands Development Enterprise are all trying to make some solution out of the competing interests. And we as a community council have to are at the bottom of the pile. So we are organising a plenary meeting of all the community councils around to try to get the voice of the people heard above the din of the competing interests of Transport Scotland, Highland Council and HIE, who are supposed to be speaking to one another. Now, on this, incidentally, they just opened a new slip road, which is the upgraded double dual carriageway. Within a week, Transport Scotland then published its long-awaited report saying they're going to close that off the same week it was opened. They're not talking to one another, and they're not listening to us, and we're having to organise plenaries of community councils locally, and we're hoping to develop that local voice. We've got another meeting tomorrow night along the same lines. The question that interests me is what you said, Oliver, about the representative aspect of government. And you said that you're hopefully trying to change that towards the people. The people are elected to represent the people, but what's actually happening, of course, once they are elected, they are now representing their party. So there's this disguised representing the people. No, it's the party management are now represented at local level. And
can I ask you, do you mean on community councils as well, or
no,
councils?
No, not community councils. Thankfully,
right.
We haven't quite reached that stage yet, but they would like to reach down there as well if they could. But I'm very interested to hear, this effort to change this concept of party machines and party management, etc., etc. And we all know about it. But it's this question: how is it going to happen? I mean, what we're trying to do is actually get the community councils locally, get them all together with a common voice. And I was very pleased to hear what was said by the other speaker there, that that's now going to be formalised in some sort of way. But we also have an Inverness Area Forum.
Okay, can I ask you something though? I sense we're going to go around the room, and I will keep doing this. We'll get a lot of good snapshots of what happens locally, and I'm still thinking that although it's useful for the guys at the top to hear all of that, they have put some strategic thoughts out to you. They've put some big thoughts out to you. And what you should be using the time for now, and there is 1 minute remaining, is you should be addressing the big thoughts they've put out. So I actually want to be ruthless now I've seen there's 1 minute, and I only want to hear from people who've got responses to those big thoughts they put out, okay? So let me just collect around. Can we, well, if it's not, don't do it. Yes? Right, here we go.
Yes, John Watson from Comcom. Picking up the 25-30 percentage points difference between demand and supply, and the inability of CoSLA to get heard by the government, how are local communities going to get heard by local authorities and their other agencies, particularly the health, through processes which are not, which are opaque and not transparent, in order to make those changes in the time frame that's here? I mean, the changes that are being talked about and the potential, it takes time for that to be achieved. The changes that are being driven by budgetary changes are happening now. Seems to me that there's potentially a huge mismatch here of lost opportunity. So what is, for instance, CoSLA doing to its members to telling them how local communities can be more active? He says that CoSLA failed in its dealings with government about the police. How are your members going to help your local communities be more efficient in dealing with CoSLA and the health boards, for example?
Okay, could it get maybe, right, let's just say take one or two, and they've got to address the points that came from the top table. Yes?
I think my point or question will tie in with the most recent one. It's sort of focusing on the 10 billion being spent by the NHS and the 1 million with the elderly being taken into hospital just to be sent home again. I feel we have to look at the fact that keeping people on their own at home is not always the best solution. There's often a lot of loneliness and isolation, and I think we should be looking at more sheltered and very sheltered housing as a way of having folks within their community. Now, how community councils can get involved in this, I'm not sure, but I think we do want to see CoSLA and the National Health Service Scotland trying to do something about it.
Okay, and your friend, Adrian?
Thank you, Leslie. Leslie asked us...
Adrian, I know you hate them, but use it like a rock star. Can't hear you otherwise.
Okay.
Point it at your face.
Right, well, I do hate them, you're right. I'm not
But we
used
can't
to
hear you.
Unlike you, I'm not used to them. Right, to try and get to the nub of the heart of the matter. Deliberative practitioner as opposed to representative practitioner. The word deliberative, I would suggest, it could border anarchy. So the question to you is how do we as community councils prevent that view from those elected representatives, both in Perth, say in the councils and in the Scottish Government? So that, well, my question to you is how can we voice ourselves with that clarity to be deliberative practitioners so we're not viewed as anarchists?
Yeah, got it. And very quick one here.
Thank you, Leslie. I'm from Kinlay, a rural community council, which is one of the areas that worries us, that the general policies tend to be too much urban directed. But can I say that government and local authorities make great play on the value of CCs, but what have they done to us? They've cut our membership from 15 to 8, the core rate number from 7 to 4, the budget from £1,300 to £1,000. Our friend here was talking about a bigger budget. That was including a capital transfer, I think it would be fair to say. Our standard thing, the £400 plus, it comes to only £1,000 in the coming year. Well, that's. I wanted our friends up there to realise that these things come down. The point that a lot of players made, but lots of things seem to be going against us, taking part in the way that you want us to develop. And on the consultation side, a lot of consultations, and which my past chairman sort of felt, why do we take part in this? It's a done deal. So that's another thing that you want to think about. So often the consultations seem to be 9/10 formulated, and then you don't take regard of what's said to you.
On the planning side, I've only just recently learnt that community councils now have to apply to be treated as statutory each time they want to object to something. Now that's absolute red tape for no reason, no benefit whatsoever. We used to have a standing situation. If a community council raised an objection to a development, it automatically went to committee, and I would like to see that reinstated.
Right, thank you. And Jean.
Hillhead Community Council, Glasgow. I'd like to draw attention.
Even you, though you are the veteran, I'm still holding on to the mic.
Sorry. Draw attention to the disparity between the government's intentions as stated and what they actually do. To take planning as an example, we would like to retain our statutory right to be consulted, but we have been disenfranchised as community councils because we have no right of appeal. Given the situation in planning departments which have been downsized and where expertise has been lost, this is extremely worrying, and we do not have access to legal aid because we are treated as corporate bodies. I'd like to know what the government intends to do to enfranchise properly community councils.
Right, okay, an impossible stack of things to answer, so don't try to answer all of them. If you could pick the things that seem to speak out most strongly to you, because we are unfortunately running over time, but I'd love to hear what you have to say. So let's start with Oliver, actually.
Okay, does this work? Can you hear me? Yep. There are so many points, and they are all very interesting. I'm just going to make 2 points. I think that the question the gentleman at the front put to me at the beginning is very, very important. Of course, you're a representative of your community. Once your community has told you what they want, and that is the key. That is what made Obama famous, the Alinsky model, so that you are participatory at the grassroots, and then you produce one voice out of many, and you take it to places. And that's fine, but is that what happens everywhere? And that is the question, and that is the point I want to make and finish with. We have heard wonderful examples of so many activities going on, and how you keep in touch with your community. But the question that is in the mind of many council officers, officials, and politicians, as well as government officials, is how do you know what your community wants? Until they know how it is that you know what your community wants, you won't have the power you deserve. And that means you need to prove it, and you need to prove it through some sort of processes. My suggestion is, let's make participatory processes. You mentioned ballots. There are so many ways of doing that. But until we are completely clear about the link between what your community, in all its diversity, with all the ethnic, gender, etc. issues represented, until that comes as a voice out of your processes, you won't have the power you deserve. That's my view.
Oliver is speaking in a session this afternoon, so we'll hear plenty more from him. Alistair.
Yeah, can you hear that? Is it working okay? I'll maybe just touch on 3 things. First of all, about consultation and consultation on the way forward. It's people like yourselves who are involved in this working group who are going to come up with some ideas that will not be decisions will not be taken, that we will share with you in order that we can move forward in ways that really reflect, as best we can, what is bound to be not an entirely consensual view. So that's a commitment on the consultation. Second thing on supporting communities. It is absolutely critical. We hear that across the piece around community councils and other forms of community organisation. In terms of community councils, we're going to get data on it. We're going to ask people what they're actually doing in terms of budgets so that we get a clearer picture of what's happening. And I suspect there is going to be a challenge back to us as government, to local government and other people in the public sector about whether they're doing enough, whether there's enough consistency and enough level of support. I will just mention planning briefly. I have to get to the bottom of it. As I said, I'm only new in. I've got to actually understand all the complexities of your role in planning. I'll take it back. I'll speak to my colleagues who are expert on planning. But the final thing I wanted to say was our colleague from, was it Sandbank? Apologies, I don't know where that is. Dunoon. People like yourselves who are doing fantastic work, and I have heard of hundreds of examples, thousands of examples of community councils doing that. Please do also engage. Tell us what would make it even better. What would enable you to go to the next stage.
Okay, thanks. And Rory, there's been a last question slipped in from a man who's allowed to do that because he's kind of the heat bummer. There's a question. Actually, he'll put it.
This one I've got to say is really more for Alistair than it is for Rory, and I was kind of surprised it didn't come up so far. In one of your slides, Alistair, you suggested that community council liaison officers would take more of a role in training and developing community councils. Now, my suspicion in the room here, and very quickly knowing this crew, I'll find out if I'm right or not, that's totally ludicrous. And it's totally ludicrous because at the moment community council liaison officers do that job as a tiny percentage of a bigger job they do in their local authority, with the sole exception of one city. So for example, in Highland you've got a community council liaison officer with 150 community councils, and her CCLO job is 20% of her time. It's 1 day a week. So there's no way she's doing any training and development of anybody. So that suggests to me three possible questions. How are CCLOs going to do training and development for community councils? You might do it if you've got 10, you're not going to do it if you've got 80. Is the government's intention in relation to this to ask local authorities nicely to make CCLOs do this? Because 35 years of experience of community councils is that 30 of 30 local authorities will say, get lost. And if you're not just going to ask nicely, are you therefore going to legislate and require local authorities to do this? Because that's the only way they'll put more resources into community councils, is if you make...
Okay, Alistair, it's probably, if you've got anything to say, it's probably good to hear it.
I can see, Vincent, how you could take that inference from what it said on the slide. But what the group's doing is discussing the implications of looking at strengthening the role of community council liaison officers and supporting community councils, including in the provision of training and development. For me, that doesn't mean that they do it themselves. It means that maybe they do the needs assessment. It means that they source where the training and development comes from. And nothing's decided. And the points you make about how do you get people to do things if you don't legislate, that's definitely something to consider. Although some people have said to me we could legislate for things like that and it still wouldn't happen. So I think it was there because the role is incredibly important and training and development is incredibly important. Those are two things we've heard already, so the group was discussing it.
Okay, another question just so you don't feel ignored. How many of the working group are present today? The Short Life working group? Okay, right. Rory, can you answer, remembering this one too?
I can. I don't think I can. I'm not going to try and answer all the questions directly, but I suppose I'm slightly disappointed by the way this discussion's gone, and you may be disappointed by what I've said. But in preparing for this and then being here, what we've actually had a discussion on is the use of our respective views of prejudice and our views on power. If this debate comes down to prejudice and power, you don't win. We don't win either, but you don't win. So we've got to have a game changer, that this is not about who's got the power to do things to people, who's prejudiced about the other, because just as you say that we're a busted flush in local government, when I was researching to come here, I heard, well, community councils are a bunch of elderly people who don't represent their communities at all. Why the heck would we listen to them? And the idea of further development for such a group is completely preposterous. Now, if we just adopt our own prejudices of each other, that's it over. We've now got to say there is a huge job to be done in Scotland. I think the motivation for change is that you cannot do that job without harnessing our mutual abilities and obligations, and that will be the motivation to do it. It won't be legislative. It will be that we face a crisis in the way in which we deliver services. You need us to be more responsive. We need you to be more of our partner in this, and we have to start developing a relationship based on those things. If we don't, then you'll be saying this to me in 10 years' time and I'll be saying the same things to you. Because it comes down to the one thing. You've got something valuable to offer and you can't understand why it's not being heard. And you think there's some prejudice at play in doing that. We've got to break that. And I'm not saying we're blamelessness, please don't take that. We've got to really redefine that discussion. My view is that the situation we're facing forces a redefinition of that. But can we put aside our prejudices and get to the real discussion? I absolutely agree with the gentleman who said these aspirations are fine, but if we don't now get to the next bit, which is how does any of this become reality, And what is the connection between participative democracy, representative democracy and the solution to these problems? We are scuppered. We've got to have that debate now. And I think that is going to be motivated by the situation we find ourselves in. I hope that's the case, and I really believe it will be the case.
Okay. Right, a lot of straight, plain talking, a lot of frustration, I'm sure, in the room, because we only got through a fraction of the points you wanted to make. But the afternoon beckons after the lunch, which you will have to do in hyper quick speed, and be back here at 1:30. So I think we're going out that door, aren't we? Yes. And you'll be led as to where you want to go. But can I please ask you to do one last round of applause for our plucky panel?